I was gone for less than 3 minutes buying a bottle of water. But when I returned to the gate, my family had already boarded the plane without me. Then the airline employee looked at my ticket and quietly said, "Ma'am, this reservation was canceled an hour ago." I remember staring at that young woman behind the counter like maybe I'd misheard her. The airport around me kept moving, people dragging suitcases, children crying, somebody laughing too loud near the coffee stand. But everything around me suddenly sounded far away. "There has to be some mistake," I said. She looked uncomfortable. "The cancellation came from the original booking account. My daughter Melissa had booked the trip. Family vacation to Charleston, her idea. She said it would be good for all of us after my surgery. Said the grandchildren wanted time with me." I stood there gripping that little bottle of water so hard it cracked in my hand. "Can you tell me who canceled it?" I asked quietly. The girl hesitated. "I'm not really supposed to." Then she lowered her voice. "It was done online under your son-in-law's account." I felt heat crawl up my neck. Greg. Of course it was Greg. My daughter's husband had spent the last 2 years treating me like some outdated piece of furniture everybody was too polite to throw away. Little comments at dinner, smirks when I forgot something minor, talking slower to me in front of strangers like I was senile. But this was different. I looked through the giant airport windows toward the runway. Their plane was already moving. They left me there. My own family boarded that plane, knowing I was still sitting at the gate. The airline employee touched my arm gently. "Do you have someone who can pick you up?" I almost laughed. At 74 years old, after raising 3 children, surviving a husband's gambling debts, working 31 years at a middle school in Dayton, Ohio, I suddenly realized I had nowhere to go. "No," I said. "Not anymore." She helped me sit down behind the counter while she searched for another flight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from age, from humiliation. Then my phone buzzed. "Melissa." "Finally," I answered immediately. "Melissa?" Her voice came out sharp and nervous. "Mom, please don't make a scene." A scene. I actually closed my eyes. "You left me at the airport. We thought you were right behind us." "That's a lie." Silence. Then Greg's voice suddenly came on the line. Calm, controlled, cold. "The truth is, Evelyn, this trip wasn't really designed for your needs." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means everybody's exhausted," he said. "The kids are uncomfortable around you lately. Melissa's stressed all the time. And honestly, after the surgery, you've become more dependent than any of us expected." Dependent. I nearly stopped breathing. 3 months earlier, I had signed temporary financial access papers while recovering in the hospital after my hip replacement. Greg had insisted it was just in case. Said he wanted to help manage my bills while I healed. Suddenly, sitting there in that airport chair, I remembered something that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks ago, my bank stopped mailing paper statements. I never requested that. "Greg," I said slowly, "what exactly have you been doing with my accounts?" The silence on the phone lasted just a little too long. Then Melissa whispered something muffled in the background, and Greg quietly said, "We'll talk when we get back." That was the moment I knew something far worse than a canceled plane ticket had been happening behind my back. I didn't sleep that night. The airline found me a seat on a late flight back to Dayton, but I barely remember the trip home. I remember the smell of stale coffee on the plane. I remember staring at the dark window while everybody else slept. Mostly, I remember replaying Greg's words over and over. We'll talk when we get back. Not we'll explain. Not we're sorry. We'll talk. Like I was the problem that needed managing. By the time I unlocked my front door after midnight, my hip was throbbing so badly I could barely stand. The house felt cold and wrong somehow. Too quiet. I left my suitcase in the hallway and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. That's when I noticed the stack of mail. Or rather, the lack of it. For 40 years, I kept a neat little pile beside the fruit bowl. Bank statements, utility bills, insurance notices. But the table was nearly empty now. I suddenly remembered Greg offering to streamline my accounts after surgery. Paperless billing, automatic payments, safer for seniors. My chest tightened. I walked to the small desk near the living room window and opened my laptop. It took me 3 tries to remember the bank password. My hands were shaking again. When the account finally opened, I felt physically sick. The balance was almost gone. I stared at the screen so long my eyes started watering. There had been over $180,000 in that account after Harold died. Not wealth exactly, but security. My husband spent his entire life driving trucks across the Midwest to leave me something stable before cancer took him. Now there was barely $12,000 left. I started clicking through transactions, wire transfers, large withdrawals, payments I didn't recognize. One recurring charge made my stomach drop completely. Charleston Coastal Properties, LLC, over $68,000, I whispered. Oh my God. That's when my phone rang again. Melissa. I answered immediately this time. What did you do to my money? Silence. Then I heard her crying softly. Mom, please don't do this tonight. Do what? You know how hard things have been. No, I snapped. Apparently I don't know anything. She started talking fast after that. Too fast. Like someone trying to outrun the truth. Greg's business had problems. The restaurant investment failed. The house refinancing went badly. They meant to pay it back. Everything was temporary. Temporary. They drained my savings while smiling across my dinner table every Sunday. You stole from me, I said quietly. No, she cried. You signed permission papers. For medical bills. They gave Greg account access. I couldn't even speak for a second. Then came the sentence I still hear in my nightmares. Honestly, Mom, we figured eventually the inheritance would come to us anyway. Inheritance. I felt something inside me go cold. Not angry, not shocked. Cold? Like finally seeing the real shape of something ugly you kept trying not to recognize. You left me at that airport on purpose, I said. Melissa didn't answer. That answer was enough. Then Greg got on the phone again. His voice sounded irritated now, no pretending anymore. You're making this emotional instead of practical. Practical. My dead husband's savings, my retirement, my future, practical. You embarrassed us with the airline, he continued. Do you have any idea how dramatic this whole thing looked in front of the kids? I actually laughed then. A terrible little laugh that didn't sound like me at all. You canceled my plane ticket. We needed space to have one vacation without worrying about you every 5 minutes. The cruelty of that sentence settled into me slowly. Because 3 months earlier, while recovering from surgery, I'd overheard my youngest grandson asking Melissa something in the hospital hallway. Is Grandma dying? And Melissa had answered softly, Not yet. I sat there gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles hurt. Then Greg said something that changed everything. If we're being honest, Evelyn, assisted living is probably the next step anyway. There it was. Finally, the real plan. I didn't say another word after that. I just hung up. The silence inside my house felt different now. Not lonely, dangerous, like I'd been living beside a gas leak for years without smelling it. I went back to the bank records and kept digging. More withdrawals, smaller ones hidden between normal expenses. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Credit card payments under Greg's business account. Luxury hotel charges in Miami. A jewelry purchase Melissa never mentioned. And every single one of them authorized under my medical power of attorney. I suddenly remembered signing those papers in the rehabilitation center while still drugged from pain medication. Greg sitting beside the bed with his calm little smile. Just routine forms, Evelyn. I felt nauseated. By 3 a.m, I realized they hadn't just borrowed money. They'd built their entire lives around the assumption I would die quietly before noticing. The next morning, I called the bank. A young fraud specialist named Andrea spoke to me for almost an hour. Calm voice, careful questions. Then she asked softly, "Mrs. Bennett, did you knowingly authorize unrestricted personal use of your funds?" No. That one word nearly broke me, because saying it out loud made everything real. Andrea advised me to freeze the accounts immediately. She also suggested filing an elder financial abuse report. I nearly dropped the phone. Elder abuse. People hear those words and picture bruises or nursing homes or strangers stealing Social Security checks. Not your own daughter. Not the little girl whose hair you braided before elementary school every morning in Columbus, Ohio. Not the child you stayed awake beside when she had pneumonia at 6 years old. But by noon that day, I was sitting inside the county administrative office answering questions from a woman named Denise, who had kind eyes and very tired eyes at the same time. "Do you feel safe at home?" she asked gently. I almost said yes automatically. Then I remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, Greg had asked for a copy of my house key in case of emergencies. And 2 days before the trip, Melissa insisted on helping me organize my medications. At the time, it felt caring. Now it felt like preparation. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Denise became very quiet after that. When I returned home that afternoon, my front door was slightly open. Not wide, just enough to make my stomach turn. I knew I locked it. Every night since Harold died, I checked that lock 3 times before bed. I stood frozen on the porch for a full minute before walking inside. Nothing looked disturbed at first. The living room was untouched, kitchen normal, hallway quiet. Then I noticed my file cabinet. The bottom drawer was open. I rushed over so fast my hips screamed. Inside were all my financial folders, insurance papers, property documents, retirement accounts. Some were missing. Specifically, the house deed folder. I just stood there staring at the empty space where it should have been. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy footsteps, not imagination. Real. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might faint. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence. Then movement again. Slow this time. Careful. I grabbed the fireplace poker beside the hearth before I could even think. At 74 years old, in orthopedic shoes and a cardigan, I climbed my own staircase holding that metal poker like a weapon. The bedroom door upstairs was partly closed, and I could hear whispering behind it, Then Greg's voice said quietly, "She's home." I froze halfway down the hallway. For a second, I honestly thought my heart might stop. Then the bedroom door opened slowly, and Greg stepped out holding a stack of papers against his chest like he belonged there, like it was his house. Behind him, Melissa appeared near my dresser. She looked pale, guilty, but not surprised. That hurt worse. "What are you doing in my home?" I asked. Greg immediately switched into that smooth voice he used whenever he wanted to sound reasonable. "You weren't answering your phone, so you broke into my house. We used the emergency key." My hand tightened around the fireplace poker. "You went through my files." Melissa stepped forward then. "Mom, please calm down." "Calm down." My entire body started shaking. "You stole my money," I whispered. "Now you're stealing documents?" Greg exhaled dramatically like I was exhausting him. "Nobody stole anything. We're trying to protect assets before you make irrational decisions." I stared at him. Assets. That's what my life had become to them. Assets. I looked at the papers in his hands. "Give those to me." He didn't move. Then I noticed something sitting on my bed. A folder. Bright blue. The logo of an assisted living facility printed across the front. Pine Gardens Senior Community, already filled out. My name typed neatly across multiple pages. I felt my knees weaken. Melissa finally started crying for real then. "Mom, we were trying to help. You were trying to put me away." "No." But Greg answered instead, "You can't live alone forever." That sentence echoed through the room, not because of what he said, but because of how rehearsed it sounded, like they'd had this conversation many times before, without me. Then he said something even worse. "We already spoke with a realtor." I honestly thought I misheard him. "A what?" "The market is strong right now," he continued carefully. "If the house sells before winter, the transition becomes easier financially." My husband's house, the one Harold built shelves for with his own hands, the kitchen where my children learned to walk, the bedroom where I held him while he died. They had already discussed selling it without telling me. I suddenly noticed Melissa couldn't look me in the eye. That's when I understood something horrifying. This wasn't Greg manipulating my daughter. They were both involved. Maybe he started it. Maybe she let herself believe his excuses. But somewhere along the line, she joined him. I pointed toward the stairs. "Get out." Greg didn't move immediately. Big mistake. Because something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. I raised the fireplace poker slightly and said, very calm, "If you don't leave my house right now, I will call the police and tell them 2 people illegally entered my home after draining my accounts." Melissa gasped softly. Greg's face changed instantly. Not guilt, fear, real fear. Because suddenly the situation wasn't private family pressure anymore. It was criminal. "You wouldn't do that to your own daughter," he said quietly. I looked straight at Melissa. She already did it to me. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Melissa burst into tears completely. Not graceful crying either. Harsh, ugly sobbing. "Mom, please, we're drowning." Greg snapped at her immediately. "Stop." But it was too late. She covered her face and the truth started pouring out between sobs. The business was failing far worse than she admitted. They were behind on the mortgage. Credit cards maxed out. The Charleston vacation had already been paid with my money, and the assisted living plan that was supposed to free up the house before foreclosure notices reached them I felt physically cold listening to her. My daughter had left me stranded at an airport while secretly planning to take my home. Then Greg quietly said the one thing he should never have said. We wouldn't be in this position if your husband had managed money better before he died. The room went silent. Harold Bennett worked himself into an early grave driving freight trucks through snowstorms and heart attacks to leave us stable. And this man, this parasite standing in my bedroom, had just insulted him inside his own house. I stepped toward Greg before I even realized I was moving, and downstairs, someone started pounding violently on the front door. The pounding hit the door again, hard enough to rattle the glass in the hallway. Melissa jumped. Greg cursed under his breath, and for one strange second, all three of us just stood there frozen in my bedroom, listening. Then came a voice from downstairs. Mrs. Bennett, police department. Greg's face lost all color. I hadn't called them. Not yet. I moved first, lowering the fireplace poker slowly before walking toward the staircase. My hip hurt so badly I could barely breathe, but adrenaline carried me down every step. 2 officers stood outside when I opened the door. One older man, one younger woman with a tablet in her hand. Mrs. Evelyn Bennett? The woman asked. Yes. We received a welfare concern report regarding possible elder financial exploitation connected to this address. I looked behind me. Greg was already halfway down the stairs. Melissa looked like she might faint. The older officer noticed them immediately. Sir, ma'am, can we speak inside? Nobody answered. The officers came in anyway. Within minutes, my quiet little living room turned into something unrecognizable. Questions, statements, bank records, names, dates. Greg kept trying to interrupt. This is a misunderstanding. We have permission. She's confused about the documents. That last sentence made the younger officer look up sharply. Are you suggesting Mrs. Bennett lacks capacity? Greg hesitated, and that hesitation destroyed him, because the officer immediately asked, Has there been a legal competency ruling? No, he admitted. The room became very still. Then Melissa finally whispered, Greg, stop talking. He ignored her. Big mistake again, because the more he talked, the worse it became. The unauthorized transfers, the property discussions, the assisted living contracts already prepared without my consent. Then the younger officer asked one simple question. Mrs. Bennett, did you at any point agree to surrender ownership of your home? No. And did you authorize these funds to be used for your daughter's family expenses? No. Greg started talking over me again. Her surgery affected her memory. That's enough, the older officer said sharply. I watched Greg's confidence crack for the first time since I met him 12 years ago. Then Melissa suddenly sat down on my couch and covered her face. I didn't know it got this bad, she whispered. Greg spun toward her instantly. What are you doing? She looked up at him with tears streaming down her cheeks. You told me we'd pay it back before she noticed. Silence. Absolute silence. The officers exchanged a quick look, and in that moment, everything finally came apart. Not because of me, because Melissa broke. Years of excuses, gone. She started confessing everything through sobs. The fake signatures on transfer approvals. The second mortgage they secretly took against their own home. The collection notices. The business debts. The private conversations about moving me into assisted living before my mind declined further. I sat there listening to my own daughter describe me like a financial obstacle. Then came the part I never saw coming. "There's something else," Melissa whispered. Greg's head snapped toward her. "Don't." But she kept crying. "The plane ticket," she said weakly. "It wasn't just about the vacation." My stomach tightened. Melissa looked directly at me for the first time all night. "Greg scheduled an appointment with a long-term care advisor in Charleston." The room went dead quiet. "He wanted you evaluated while we were there," she whispered. "He said if a doctor documented cognitive decline, getting control of the house would be easier." I honestly couldn't breathe. The airline ticket, the missing paperwork, the assisted living forms, the account access, it was never random. It was a plan. A slow, careful plan built around convincing people I was becoming incapable. And the worst part, my own daughter helped him do it. The younger officer quietly asked, "Mrs. Bennett, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" I looked around my living room slowly, at Harold's old chair, at the family photographs on the wall, at the staircase where my children used to slide down in socks every Christmas morning. Then I looked at Melissa. She couldn't even meet my eyes anymore, and that hurt more than the theft ever would. I opened my mouth to answer the officer, when Greg suddenly bolted for the front door. Greg hit the front door so hard it slammed against the wall. The younger officer shouted, "Sir, stop right there." But Greg was already halfway across the porch. The older officer went after him immediately, while the younger one stayed inside with us. Through the front window, I could see flashing patrol lights reflecting across the wet pavement outside. Neighbors' curtains started moving up and down all over the street. Small town Ohio, nothing stays private long. Melissa was still crying into her hands when we heard shouting outside. Then came the sound of somebody falling hard against metal. The younger officer spoke calmly into her radio while I sat frozen in Harold's recliner, staring at the family photos above the fireplace. Christmas mornings, beach trips, graduations, 30 years of smiling pictures hiding what we became. A minute later, the older officer brought Greg back inside in handcuffs. I will never forget the look on his face. Not shame, not remorse, pure hatred, directed at me. "This is your fault," he hissed as they walked him through the living room. "You're destroying your own family over money." Money? Even then, that's all he understood. Melissa started sobbing harder. "Greg, please stop." But he turned on her too. "You couldn't keep your mouth shut for 5 minutes?" The younger officer immediately stepped between them, and suddenly I saw it clearly. The control, the pressure, the manipulation. Not just toward me, toward Melissa too. That didn't erase what she'd done, not even close. But for the first time all night, I saw fear in my daughter instead of greed. The officers eventually took Greg outside again while another patrol car arrived. More questions followed, more paperwork, more statements. Around midnight, the house finally became quiet. Melissa sat across from me at the kitchen table where I'd fed her cereal before elementary school for years. Her mascara had streaked halfway down her face. She looked exhausted, older somehow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at her for a very long time. Then I said the truth. "You were willing to erase me while I was still alive." She broke completely after that, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and ugly. "I didn't know how to stop," she said. "Every month got worse. Every debt got bigger. Greg kept saying once the house sold, everything would stabilize." "The house," I repeated quietly. Not my home, not your father's home, the house. She nodded weakly. Then she said something that cut deeper than everything else combined. He said you were getting old enough not to fight it. I actually felt my heartbeat stumble, because that was the real humiliation underneath all of it. Not the money, not the betrayal, the assumption that age made me disposable, that eventually I'd become confused enough, weak enough, lonely enough to surrender quietly. Melissa reached across the table suddenly. Mom, please don't cut me out completely. I stared at her trembling hand. This little girl I once carried on my hip through grocery stores in Cincinnati. This woman who left me alone in an airport while planning to take my home. Outside, I could still see police lights washing red and blue across the curtains. Then my phone buzzed beside me. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood went cold instantly. It was a photograph. My front porch from earlier that evening, taken before I arrived home, and beneath it, one sentence. She was supposed to sign tonight. Some stories end quietly, but the damage stays with people for years. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and subscribe for more real emotional stories like this one.